Going live. You want to write that down? Let's do it. Need you to write
Looking
that.
beautiful as always, Kez.
Thank you, darling.
Then you need to remember to do the title.
What did I say?
Oh, just realized I had something.
Title. All right, ready? Wait. Going live.
Welcome to another episode of The Caribbean Edge. So excited to have you. I first want to thank everyone for adjusting their schedule, especially attorney Samuel Yeboah. Thank you for starting early with us. We have a time frame difference in Canada, and Dr. LisaGunderson has another event to attend to right after this. So we appreciate everyone adjusting the time, including our viewers as well, because you're so used to us starting at 8 o'clock. But I want to say welcome to our two guests for tonight. Two amazing people. One I know very well, and one I'm about to discover along with our viewers. So I'm going to introduce Dr. LisaGunderson first. She's my beautiful cousin who was born in the USA, now lives in Canada. She has two biracial boys, must indicate that. She is a USC graduate. Go Trojans. Jamaican heritage, of course, because I'm Jamaican. So Lisa's mom and my dad are siblings. So we're first cousins. And she's a psychologist, but beyond that, she's a friend. And she is one of the most honest people you can ever meet. And she cares about people.
Absolutely.
So that's Lisa. Anything else you want to add to your intro, Ms. Dr. Gunderson?
I just want to say I turned 50 last week, I think. So when you've lived more life than you have left, you don't have time for any BS. So you're going to get the straight.
The straight.
Night. Yep.
There you go. Thank you so much
Yes.
for that. And
thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And then we have attorney Samuel Yeboah, who is from Ghana, West Africa. And he owns and operates Yeboah Law Firm right here in Florida. And he does, along with a lot of other businesses, Commissioner Denny's grant, I have to thank her for connecting you to the Caribbean Edge and to our viewers as well. It's very interesting to find out all the great work that you do within the community and how everything that's happening, the temperature in the US, around the world, has impacted both of you. And, you know, based on your personal experience as well, what advice, whether it's personally or professionally, you would want to give to, especially our youth. So I want to focus a lot on the youth of, because, you know, Lisa has two boys and you do a lot of work with young kids as well. So welcome. Anything you want to add to your intro?
I think you did an excellent job.
Thank you so much for that. So what I wanted to talk about is, you know, just recap that, you know, George Floyd died, I believe, back on May 25th, and it shook the entire world. For me personally, I think we've just been silent. You know, we know that, you know, police brutality exists, racism exists, people are held back, you know, whether it's professionally. And I just feel like this was a breaking point for a lot of people, and a lot of different things led up to this. So when this happened, can you take us back, each of you, to that moment and tell us how did it impact you personally? And do you also share any personal experience that you've gone through as well? Dr. Gunderson, you want to go first?
I want to say that I moved to Canada about 10 years ago. So I have been through the LA riots. My parents went through the Watts riots, and there's a long history. I think with George Floyd, one of the things that was so impactful is the fact that something happened also the day before. And what happened the day before, if you remember the bird watcher and the dog, the bird watcher and the
Amy
dog.
Cooper.
Yes. And one of the things that happened there is you saw, just without any question, what we know has been going on in the Black community for decades, right? This woman is getting on the phone, calling 911, starting to exaggerate everything that's happening, knowing that 911 calls have been a reason for people to get arrested, right? Setting up this man basically to get at minimal arrested or likely killed. But I think what happened is her dog. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of white people who've been woken up in some fashion. And part of that was them watching this woman strangling her dog. And for some reason, that really connected to certain people, because we've seen white women, especially, doing this to Black people for just day after day after day. We've seen that happen. But when people saw this animal, I think it set off something in people, which is very fascinating to me, because it talks about the dehumanization that has happened to Black people for centuries, right? And when you see her doing that, and then you have this animal here, it set off a bunch of things. And then you had George Floyd. And what happened with Mr. Floyd, from the moment that the cops put the handcuffs on him and set him up against the side, causing no problems, nothing. And he's sitting there for a full 5 minutes, and then he's walked across the street, and then he's going to be dead in 10. It is so egregious that I think that within those 24 hours, for that to happen the way it did was one of the things that really just set off a lot of people. And so I find it fascinating when that happened for us and our family. Unfortunately, it was another Black man murdered, right? And we've heard that story. And my eldest is 18. He remembers, Trayvon Martin, like he started wearing a hoodie. Like, we just have so many examples. And this was another Black man again. And I look at my boys and my heart breaks for my community. The fear starts to rise again for my children. And I was like, just, here we go again, right? And so I think we'll talk later about if this is a pivot point or if this is just going to be, a month from now, it won't matter. But I really think what stands out for me was the combination of how this happened. And I think that's really what set off a lot of non-Black people. And we've been enraged for centuries, but it required non-Black people to also start to get enraged. And for some reason, I think that combination of those two things, along with some other things, Brianna, the other things that happened, really made a difference this time.
Thank you. An attorney, Yeboah?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I wish I could say that when I saw what happened, that it was just something that changed my view of what goes on, especially with our community. But unfortunately for me, it was like just another incident, another example of what's been going on for a while. I understand this particular episode, and not to devalue this gentleman's life, but there's been, countless incidents where Black people, for whatever reason, end up dead in the same situation that if the person had been white, they would figure out a way to de-escalate the situation. The person can go home or go to jail. So the impact it had on me is, obviously I'm going to be a little bit upset. As a Black man myself, I've dealt with some of these issues. I've had situations from when I was younger, getting pulled over by the police, being questioned, and then being released. And then, one of the questions you want to ask, sometimes you would ask and sometimes you wouldn't, is why'd you pull me over? What did I do? Basically, because typically police don't stop you just to chit chat with you, find out how your day is and send you on your way. From things like being asked, what do you do? Things that really have nothing to do with why you were pulled over. So I've had that experience myself. I've actually had the experience of being arrested before. Only once in my life that happened to me, unfortunately, when I was an attorney, that occurred here in Broward County. And I remember to myself that day when that occurred, I was a passenger in the vehicle. I wasn't even driving, didn't do anything wrong. I just thought to myself, that's enough. I'm an attorney and they still had, just came up with a reason to take me to jail, where I spent the night in jail for again, no reason at all. I was a passenger. Ultimately, I ended up suing the city, went in front of a jury that was mostly white, after the court threw out the criminal charge, but went in front of a jury that was mostly white. And I think in that case, we asked for $200 and something thousand. The jury wanted to give me $1 million because they just saw what happened. They actually tripled what we asked for. But when I got a chance to speak to the foreperson of a jury after the fact, she made the point that, when they went back to vote, everybody thought that I should get at least $1 million, even though that's not what we were asking for, just because they thought it was so wrong what happened. But my situation, only reason I bring that up is to say that if you're Black and you're in this country and you've been alive long enough, you've probably had some kind of incident with the police, especially as a man, behind a vehicle or just walking the street or whatever. You think about stop and frisk in New York. It's just, and I'll tell you the story to say that, just coming back to Floyd, I was saddened by what I saw, but these things have been happening for years, not decades, but hundreds of years, so the personal impact on me was, pretty much here we go again. That was pretty much how I felt about it. Now, I'm happy that this one incident, for whatever reason, has triggered things that the other incidents didn't do. I think the only thing I can think that may even rival something like this is Emmett Till, when it happened way back in the day, and his mother had the courage to have an open casket so people could see what was done to her baby. For something that we all know now was a lie, because the lady who passed away apparently admitted that she lied about what happened.
Yes, she is.
So it's just, it's sad, but I'm just hoping this incident can trigger something that's going to lead to real change. Because walking down the street or driving while Black should not be a reason for you to get pulled over by the police, which can then escalate depending on what that person is bringing to the table to you eventually being dead. So it's just, I don't know. It's disappointing, but again, it wasn't surprising.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing such a personal experience, especially as an attorney, and just putting that out there, that even with your accomplishments, that you have faced it, because people need to see that, right? People need to understand it can happen to any of us. It surely happened to me just driving to work going 30 miles per hour. And I've shared that on a previous episode, but it happens to us as children. And I want to take Lisa back a little bit because I have something that she wrote about, and it was when she was a little girl, and she says it was her first experience in grade 3. And Lisa's grown up in predominantly white neighborhoods. And she says she was the only Black family in an upper class neighborhood. And she remembered showing her parents a very horrible picture that these kids had drawn of her. And they wrote the N-word, which I don't even want to say it. And she asked her parents what this was. And she asked them, why do people hate me for the color of my skin? And that's so hard, especially as Jamaican parents, because we don't grow up with that. You know, I've said on this show, the first time I was asked, you know, what I was, like to pick black or white, I really had no idea what to pick because I'd never thought of what I was, right? In that sense. So Lisa, take us back to that time because that's a really young age, and from what you wrote, it broke my heart when I read it.
You know, it's a young age, but we know that that's about the age when children, especially African American children, are going to have their first encounter with some kind of racist talk. And you can expect that it's going to happen around second, third grade. And it could be something like that where it's just blatant, or it could be something about your skin looking like crap or looking like mud or something like that. And so it's really important for parents to be able to have conversations with their children to kind of begin to prepare them for the things that they're going to be facing, unfortunately, for a lifetime, right? And we may be able to speak a little bit about that kind of preparation. With that particular incident, like you said, my parents didn't come into the United States until they were in their 20s, and they met actually in the US, and come to find out that they only lived about an hour away from each other in Jamaica, right? But they came in the 60s, and you're talking about people who grew up knowing the strength of Black community, Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black engineers, the whole country run by Black people, right? And then my mom gets off a plane and she's told Black people go that way, or my dad is told to drink out of the colored water fountain, right? And the stories that they shared. So they were prepared because they understood where I was at and wanted to make it very clear to me that there's nothing wrong with us, right? There's nothing wrong with this skin that you're in. It's an incredible, beautiful, just wonderful thing to be. And it has so much history connected to it. And it has so much joy and pride. And part of our problem, I think, especially in the United States, is our story is told from one of just kind of, our story starts with enslavement and it's all about oppression. And it doesn't, we have to rewrite that narrative for our children, right? We have to forge a different type of story for them. And it's critically important that we don't continue those kind of narratives because it ends up having negative mental wellness consequences for our young children. And one of the things that we know without doubt is if your child has high, strong racial and ethnic identity, it serves as one of the biggest protectors for them, especially when they go into middle school and high school, against drugs, against hurting yourself, against anything kind of negative. And on the flip side, it increases things like intelligence and academics and social emotional connection and support. So you absolutely cannot go wrong with really encouraging racial and ethnic identity space at all. So unfortunately, it was the first, and definitely not the last that happened. And yeah.
Wow. So I never had the conversation with my kids.
Interesting.
I don't think I'm the only parent.
Nope,
I want to say that because being Jamaican, I somewhat we all live in a bubble. And I say this all the time. You only know what you know, right?
Right.
So my first encounter with a dirty cop, you know, my concern was, thank God it was me and not my kids, because I don't know if they would have reacted the same way I did. Not that they would have reacted poorly, but I'd rather take the blunt of a dirty cop than my kids be subject to it. So it was after all this has happened now, and I realized that I have to have conversations with my kids. And I said it to AJ, I said, I've never had to talk to you about this stuff, but with everything going on now, I know I have to have these conversations. And then when Jade came out, he's like, Jade, do you realize mom has never spoken to us about that? And it's because, you know, I feel like we just got lucky. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
not everyone can say that. But now I'm faced with having these conversations with my kids because it's the reality that they live in.
Yeah.
So, you know, Attorney Yeboah, you work with a lot of kids. Do the kids tell you their stories, or what are some of the things that you can share with us about the work that you're doing with the youth in the community?
Thank you for that question. I think it's really important because I think a lot of things, at least in my opinion, this is not something that's based on obviously any kind of training, but I think a lot of what a person is capable of later in life says very early, what they think of themselves, you know, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about people that look like them. I mean, those type of things are really, really important. And I can tell you just from my own experience as a child, growing up in neighborhoods that were not the nicest. You know, there was 5 of us. I'm the youngest of 5. And I do remember some of the kids that I used to run around with that, you know, were in some of these same bad neighborhoods that were, in my estimation, just as smart as I was, but just didn't have the guidance that I did when I went home. Being from an immigrant family, we came here, my parents always told me we came here for an education. So it's really important that, you know, you hit the books, you do certain things. So when we were out running around in the neighborhoods, you know, we're doing the same things, but when we went home, we were being forced to do our homework when they weren't, you know? So over the years, you can see the separation in terms of what we thought we were capable of and what we thought, you know, the world basically could give us if we had the necessary tools. So one of the things I do when I go to the schools to talk to the kids is make sure they understand that you don't have to come from means to make it. You know, you can start where you stand. You know, the decisions that you're making now are going to decide where you go later on in life, you know? And the fact that education, quite frankly, is the great equalizer, because most of us are not going to be LeBron. Most of us are not going to be, you know, whatever entertainer people look up to, whether it be rapper or whatever, you know? Most of us are going to have to make it a different route. You know, so to a certain extent, I think it's important that they see people who have done it either through trade school, you know, have become professionals. You know, they need to see those examples so they know that it's real, you know, because a lot of these kids don't see that at home, you know, or they think it's something that can't happen to them because maybe you grew up with certain advantages that they don't have, you know. But I just think it's really important for them to know that they matter. And that's one of the things that I try to share when I go talk to them. You know, I start out by letting them know that they matter. They are our future, in essence, you know, and that none of them, you know, have the right really to give up on what they could become. You know, they need to do everything they can and not evaluate what they can do in life based on where they are right now in this particular area of this stage of their life. So I just try to encourage them to make them believe that they can, because everything starts with belief. Then, you know, we can start talking about the tools, because once they accept that this is something that is possible for them, then you got to tell them how they can go about reaching whatever heights they're capable of reaching. So that's really what my talks to the various schools that I've been to, and there's different high schools in Broward County that I've been to, really focusing on the schools that the kids go to as a last stop, you know, because they've gotten in so much trouble at different places. But I think, you know, lack of self-worth or lack of belief in yourself can manifest itself in so many different ways. You know, you get so many behaviors that result from that, you know, acting out, doing bad things and, you know, all that stuff, when if they knew that there was something else out there for them and that something else was possible for them, that they would, you know, potentially act differently, you know, conduct themselves differently and make those things possible. So that's my take on it.
May I add something to that, Dawn?
Go right ahead.
Yeah. A couple things that were just said. I think when talking about the conversation piece, it's kind of like sex. we should never just have the sex talk with our kids, right? Where you're sitting there and going, okay, everybody sit down now, we're going to talk about sex. And I'm uncomfortable and your kids are uncomfortable and we're looking at and like, gosh, how long, mom, really? Like it's been an hour. And then once we're done, we're out and that's it. And we never talk about it again. That should be a conversation that happens developmentally throughout their entire life, right? From 1, 2, all the way through, at appropriate levels and ways. It's the same thing with racism. We should never just sit down and have the talk or the talk about how to handle it when a cop stops you. These should be conversations that you're having with your child all along the way. And we have to have them a bit differently because we don't have the luxury, I think, to stay in like a bubble because it could actually be dangerous for our children, not just physically, but mentally as well. We have a lot of deconstruction we have to do with our children because they are in a society and a system that values the opposite of what they are. And so we have to, again, kind of rewrite these narratives. So when some of us can rely on experiences, when I got stopped by a police officer at going on an on-ramp, like literally, and then pulled me over with my sister, and he asked me to get out of my car. Now, my 50-year-old self would never have done that, but my 24-year-old self did that. No license, didn't ask for a license, didn't tell me what was wrong. I got out of the car, went to the back of the car, and the other officer went and stood so my sister couldn't get out of the car. And then we started having this conversation, and I told him I'm a graduate student at USC. And then that shifted everything. Right? Now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, really? Blah, blah, blah. And I say this for two reasons. One, later on, when I do a lot of interaction with police, I represent the Black community on a committee in our city, Greater Victoria Police, to talk about issues. When I was in Sacramento, I was appointed by the mayor there to be on a commission because they were disproportionately arresting African American and Latinos and stopping us in terms of traffic, even though it was white people who had more of the violations, right? So I was asked to be on a commission with regard to that. And my officer friends are telling me, you know what probably happened there is they just wanted to get a better look at you. They saw you and your sister walking out of the club, and that, experience happens that way, the sexualization of us as Black women, right? But that kind of experience, so I'm thinking of that, so I know I need to talk to my kids about how to handle that because I had that kind of personal experience with it. But if you hadn't, or you grow up in different ways, it's still important for you to share that. And as Black families, we have to help children disconnect things. I speak to a lot of young people, and I go to a lot of schools. And one of the things I do is I try to show them the connection between being Black and negativity, how it's spoken to us. So I ask them, when you hear Black, what do you write? And we list all these things. And if I'm with a set of girls and has a girl, and then Black girl, what does that look like for you? And the things that are coming up are not things like epitome of beauty, intelligent engineers, doctors, instead it's that stuff that society is feeding them. And you have to know that when we're born in this society, it's a sexist, heterosexist, ableistic, racist space. You have to consciously and intentionally undo some of that. Because if you choose to not, and you can act like nothing is going to happen, they're being taught that by what they see, what they watch, what they're taught in school, what they're not taught in school, and who is valued. So it's a real intentional decision. And my parents recognized that as we were growing up. And that's why we went back home to Jamaica so often. And they brought a family into the house to the point where they moved us back home for a couple of years because they wanted us to see that we indeed run countries and spaces. So when you hear America talk about we don't have, Black people can't be doctors or lawyers or this, well, what's wrong with America? Because there are countries that are full of us and we do all those things. That's what I mean by the narrative, right? So you have to intentionally And it's never too late to have the conversation because this is lifelong. Never too late.
Yeah, two things you said, Lisa, like age appropriate. Like I watched a video recently,
Very
and it was
important.
this little girl. She looked like 5,
Mhm.
6 years old, right?
Mhm.
And her dad was teaching her if they got pulled over, how to respond. And
Mhm.
she would say her name and hold up her hands and say, "My name is Dawn, and I have nothing to harm you with."
Mhm.
I don't know at 5, 6 years old if that's age appropriate. So I think people in general are trying to figure out what conversations we should be having with our kids. Fortunately, mine are grown, so I can talk to them as if they're grown. But the concern is for the young children that need to have these conversations. They may need to get that professional help. And also, as parents, some of us don't know how to have these conversations because one, you're in your bubble, you haven't experienced it. So you also have to start educating yourself, which I started doing since this whole incident, is just trying to learn more and more about what people go through. And I do that through videos, educational videos as well, because I don't have time to really sit there and read a lot, but I'm listening while I'm working and multitasking.
Right.
So, when do we start these conversations? Because I wouldn't expect so early that, kids are really being faced with discrimination.
Yeah.
And you also have non-Black parents as well,
Yeah.
that are probably interested in having these conversations with their kids. Because
Yes.
we've all seen the videos of the little kids, they don't care about their skin color, right? And they're hugging each other, everything else. So there are parents out there that are not being biased and racist.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'll speak after he speaks and I'll give some concrete suggestions.
Oh, okay. I just had a couple of comments. I won't be long, but I mean, it's funny you bring this up, but I mean, if people are honest with themselves, you got to have that conversation with yourself every day you get out, because you're constantly being bombarded with stuff, whether it's something that's obvious to you or subconscious. Sometimes I turn certain things off. I don't watch certain things on TV because, I mean, I don't know how it's affecting just my outlook on things, how I feel about certain things. I think we've all been damaged to a certain extent. You can't grow up in an environment and think you're immune to what you get fed every day. You just can't. You're not immune to the way you get treated. I mean, there's other examples that I can give in different areas, whether it's professional, just walking in the store and having people following you around. I'm just different things, I mean, how can I put it? You don't get a day off for being Black in this country, depending on where you go. If you're out long enough, something's going to happen that makes you think about it. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. Some of us may be oblivious to certain things, but I mean, it's not like, a religion or something like that where people may not know what you are until you tell them. You can't hide what you are, not that you would want to, so to a certain extent, you have to guard your psyche at all times. When people are questioning your ability to do certain things or whatever, I mean, you have to kind of have the ability to have that talk with yourself internally when you wake up, when you're walking through your day, when you get home. I have things that I look at to kind of keep me focused on what I believe that I can accomplish, because sometimes that stuff is called into question and you're not made of a rock. Those things do have an impact on you, but you just got to be strong and just work your way through that stuff.
I'm going to answer by giving some concrete suggestions to what you had asked on in terms of starting with age. I think that the age that you'd have conversations about anything with your child, whether it be this issue, drugs, sex, that ultimately is going to depend on you as a parent and your belief system and so forth, right? And that's something you have to think about for yourself. But if we're talking about kind of these conversations, part of it is like our language. So young children, for example, we may not talk about, anti-racism, this, that. We may be talking instead about fairness, right? We may instead, I would not ever talk about being colorblind. You're right. Kids notice the difference. They're not blind to that. My son knew the difference between mommy looking one way and daddy looking another. The issue is not that, it's about color equity, right? We want people to notice and see that it's equal. And unfortunately, a lot of people think being colorblind is equivalent to color equity, and it is not at all. Because the problem is when you're colorblind, then it's impossible for you then to become a dismantler of racism, to become an ally to me, because you're not noticing anything. And second, it's factually incorrect. Of course you notice I'm Black. How do you know? What am I, gray? You must notice I'm Black. So it's really about color equity. And we can talk to kids at a very young age about those kind of things, about fairness, about how everybody deserves to be treated a certain way. It's similar to how parents think about kindness. You know, we want to raise kind children, and we do things from, I've never heard somebody say, I'm going to wait till I'm 8 or 9 to teach my kid to be kind. We do it in different ways. And it's the same thing with this issue. I think for very young children, it is really important to pour into them the positivity of being a Black person, of being of African ancestry and heritage. And I want to illustrate that with, if you can imagine a glass and it's full of water, right? And racism, if you poke a hole in it, it's leaking water out every day. And our job, I feel, as parents is to make sure that we're continually pouring water into our children. So when they face those incidences, they can dip into that and pull that out. You can do that from a very young age by reading stories of our people and wonderful things that they do, have in their rooms pictures of wonderful scientists and lawyers and aviators, and along with our sports and our music, you know, tell them stories, watch the shows that they're, you know, watching, listen to certain podcasts, feed their brain, pour into them the wonderful things we know about our people. And by doing that, you're indeed being you're activating anti-racism there, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of direct, we sit down, have the conversation. It's really filling up their minds with certain ideology. So when they're faced with other things, they know that that's not true. And
Right.
in the United States, you have to do that intentionally, because unlike Jamaica, where on the billboards people look like me and the kid on the diaper bag looks like me, that is not going to be necessarily the case. And for those of you who have children in your kind of upper middle class, white spaces, right? You're not living in Black space. You have to remember to do that for them as well, because many times we may be the only ones. And you have to be very intentional in making sure you create Black space for your child if they're in a lot of white space, because they too can start to mix things up and think that you have to be white to be successful. And that becomes a very dangerous thing. So you have to be intentional about that too, and make sure they feel comfortable about who they are. So when they're older, they have no question and no doubt about that.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think history is so important.
So important.
You know, and kids in our communities are not taught their history. You know, everything that you're taught is someone else's history. I mean, to a certain extent, it dovetails with what your experience is, but you got to know where you come from. You got to know what you've done to know what you're capable of. You know, history is very, very important. I think it's like a root, and that's going to determine to a certain extent how you grow. You know, what you're exposed to, what you know about people like yourself, and not just the negative things that you're told about, you know, Africa or just Black people in general. I mean, there's a reason why during Jim Crow and all that stuff, they, you know, did a lot to try to dehumanize people, you know, because I just think that's important. So you don't learn about your history, you don't really know where you come from or your people come from. I just think that puts you at a significant disadvantage, you know, so.
So Attorney Samuel, I want to ask you this. So for you personally, with everything that's happening, people are putting themselves at risk with COVID-19. We can't ignore that right now. They expect another 200,000 deaths by October. I mean, the numbers are there, but people are standing up and protesting. Hopefully, the majority seem to be doing it safely. And not even just protesters, the country is opening up early and people are out there. I was watching CNN last night just before bed, and 16 young girls went out to hang out, and all 16 of them got COVID-19. You know, fortunately for them, it was a mild case of it. But with everything going on, what have you personally evaluated about it? Like, are you changing anything that you do within the community, your conversations with the people you interact with, whether it's the youth or professional people or just friends some of us may be losing friends throughout this process.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, me personally, I have not been touched in terms of anyone in my personal circle or even the people at work. But I do know that we shut down our offices on, I think, March 17th. And some people haven't even come back to work yet. And I understand we try to be very sensitive to some of the concerns people have. Because fortunately, because I've gotten to at least a certain level, not that I've arrived, a lot of the people that work for me, not all of them, but a lot of them look like me, you know, maybe not quite as dark, but, you know, I mean, in a sense, you know, I have a lot of other minorities that I've been fortunate enough to give opportunities to, but unfortunately, our community has been hit hard or harder than other communities as far as the impact of COVID, you know, and there's been different, I've got my own ideas about why that could be the case, not just the underlying health issues that they have. So, I mean, it just, it's almost like whenever anything bad happens, especially along these lines, you know, it's always 10 times worse in our community than it is in other communities. Just because of the lack of, you know, healthcare, the same access to healthcare. Even if you get access to healthcare, I mean, how seriously do, you know, the professionals that you go to take your issues as they would other communities' issues, you know? Because there's bias there too, you know? And then when I go to the grocery store, I see a lot of the people that are working there are Black and brown people, you know, the people that are first in line to have contact with folks or whatever. So, I mean, it's hard. So honestly, I've not had an opportunity to really go out and speak to the schools, and I kind of miss doing that. I haven't had an opportunity to, you know, to really give my opinion of certain things. I can say that our business, for one, we had a little bit of difficulty getting some of the same aid that other companies seem to get very easily, you know. But fortunately, I was able to call in some favors to get certain things to happen. But it's just, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot of answers as far as that goes. It's just unfortunate, I guess is what I can say. You know, the more we can do to kind of equalize what happens in the health system will be really, really good, you know, to kind of help along that situation, along those lines. So that's really all I can.
Thank you. I do want to touch on mental health because as Caribbean people, we don't look at that, you know. As Black people, we don't focus on mental health. I know growing up, we would just call people mad and they're off to the side. I know a lot of times we'll say that Baba is their therapist. I know we rely on religion and say God's going to take care of it. So a lot of parents struggle with the fact that our kids may need help, professional help. And at the rate we're going, some of us may not be able to have these conversations with our kids and may need to seek professional help. So I know from speaking to Lisa, only 4% of psychologists, unfortunately, are Black or brown. So the problem is, how do people that cannot connect with the culture, the differences, because we're even different within our own islands and countries, right? How do they give therapy or speak to our youth? And a lot of our youth will need assistance on that. So Lisa, you're in this profession. What do you have to say along those lines?
What you said is just so accurate. I was the only one in my PhD clinical psych program. It's about 7 years long, and I was the only Black person in that program. And I think maybe they've graduated a couple of us, over 20 years. And there is just a dearth of Black psychologists. And even when we get our degrees, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do clinical work, right? So there's that piece to it as well. I found that just because of what you said, and because of our culture and our history, there's a bit of mistrust and rightfully so, in some of the medical fields. If you think about the Tuskegee experiment, for example, and some things that have happened. And so for those of us who come out, part of it is, how do we get psychology out, right, to our people who aren't necessarily going to come to us? And so many of us work in community and try to do a variety of different things because we want to try to get that information out. And so in my case, with my business, with One Love, we do a lot of training and workshops. And because of COVID, one of the things that is happening is because of that isolation that's happening for a lot of people. And as a people, we're used to being around each other, and we want to hug, and a lot of us are feeling that. So you're seeing an increase in anxiety and an increase in depression. And some of us are trying to work at home while teaching our kids. And no, I have to do that, and I'm still having to eat. I was on a call today while doing the dishes at the same time, right? And I don't think my kids still have been fed yet tonight, right? And so that kind of combination of all of those things leads us to a space of, now what do we do? And then when you add to the fact of access, because it's not like therapy is cheap. So if you don't have insurance to cover it, who's going to have that extra $7,500, $150 to pay a therapist anyway? So we have some real systemic racist issues that I think COVID is exacerbating, and we're paying the brunt for that. And that's access to proper mental health care, having enough providers, creating a pipeline to increase the amount of therapists, right? So part of the thing is to not just think of psychologists. There's more of us as social workers, for example, and they also can be helpful. So looking for psychologists, social workers, other persons is important for those people who have benefits. One of the things to really think about is the associations in your state. So in California, I was part of the Association of Black Psychologists. There's also some mental health for racialized people. So you might not be able to get a Black psychologist, but maybe you could get a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color, somebody else who might be able to relate to you in that way. Or you might find a white psychologist who specializes in working in certain space. That's a bit rare to find, but it really is about trying to connect with associations like the Association of Black Psychologists, for example, and reaching out to them, and they would be able to be helpful in that regard. And there's a lot of statewide associations that could be helpful, as well as national. So like the American Psychological Association, they have a separate page dedicated to issues for Black persons, for all the ethnic groups, also for sexual orientation and identity. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research with regard to that. And also many organizations, like my website, will have certain resources that people could go to and speak to, like the things you were talking about earlier, Dawn. How do I talk to my kids about these issues? If I'm a non-Black parent, but maybe I'm raising a Black child, transracial adoptive parent, there's resources there that you could get a hold of as well. And so video and YouTube, those kind of things are helpful. But going to like a website like mine or other people's websites, if you can kind of Google that, you might be able to find multiple resources to help you have the conversation with people. I unfortunately don't have a better answer, because it's going to take some systemic change to change those numbers. And so what we really have to work on is, how do we get non-Black therapists to really be effective in giving counseling to us? And that's something that we need to really work on, because 85% or so of therapists don't look like us, right? And we're really going to have to figure out how to engage in that process. In the meantime, though, I want to say that you could go to your pastor, to your best friend, to a bunch of different people, and we do that. And you could also create like a Zoom where you're talking with others. So like moms who are having trouble, Black moms who need help, you all could create a Zoom and we could get together and have those conversations. And that's what's happening for us. So we have a sister friend group, we have a girls with Afro textured hair group, and we're attempting to connect to each other on Zoom. But ultimately, if it's beyond your control and ability, please seek help. Please seek help. And it's one of those things that it may feel uncomfortable, but I'm asking people to truly call a friend who may have had help, get referrals from people, but really try to seek some help for yourself and for your family. I will also know that there's things you can go to, sites you can go to where you can actually engage and find out if maybe you need to get some help. And those
You have
kind
to share those with us so we can post them in the Caribbean Edge as well.
Yeah, I will do that. And because I know of our time, we're updating our resources because of COVID, and we're going to have a bunch of new resources up on Friday. So if anybody visits us after Friday, and I will make sure to make a note, if you heard on Caribbean Edge, and put some specific things down there that will be helpful to people who are viewing today.
And Attorney Yeboah, I want to ask you about the men, right? The men in the family. So my brother sent me a video for someone in Turks and Caicos today or yesterday. And he was talking to the men about men stepping up in the families. And even if they're no longer married, right? To just be there for their kids, and how significant it was. And for you yourself, stepping up and probably being a father to a lot of kids in the community, right? A role model, so to speak. So what advice would you give along those lines to men, talking to men and just not sleeping with anybody and having kids, and then these kids don't have a father or father figure? Or how are you a father figure to other people's kids?
Well, I mean, I don't have any kids of my own, so I can't speak on the, spreading your seed piece of it. But what I can say is, I mean, Black men in particular, I think there's, just the kids that I've dealt with. Being a man is not just about being able to reproduce. You have to be able to take care of your kids. You have to be able to be there for them in ways that, a lot of people aren't prepared to be able to do. You have to be an example for them for what they can do, when they get out into the real world, and how they should treat each other. I think we have an issue with that in our community to a certain extent. I know we have a lot of problems, and certain things are imposed on us by society. But we can be kinder to each other, we can be kinder to our women, because they need our support as well. So just, I mean, I guess the definition of a man is kind of what, I deal with sometimes when I talk to some of these kids about, what a real man should do. So that's, I guess, what I can share. But not having been blessed with a child myself, I have not had to do the parenting thing, at least not at this point. So, but one of the things that I did discuss with you that I think is really important that I want to make sure that I touch on is just, you know, what we do after, you know, all the protests and all these other things that are going on. I just think it is so important. It's one of the things I try to talk about building wealth and trying to keep some of that wealth in our communities, you know, because once this is over, then what? You know, the one of the things that I know about just American society in general, if you want to see at the table to a certain extent, and I'm not talking about one person going out there and getting rich or whatever, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about going out and supporting the Black businesses in your community, you know, like Lisa here, for example, One Love, you know, if you need certain services, you know, if it takes you a little longer, look for people that can provide some of those services that could use your support in their businesses, you know. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't have the support of the Black community, you know, because a lot of the people that I get an opportunity to represent are people that look like me, you know. So I mean, I've looked at different studies that talk about how often a dollar turns over in certain communities. And unfortunately, in our community, as soon as money come in, it goes out. You know, we're looking to support, you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't do business with other people. That's not what I'm getting at. But I just think it's really, really important that we build a base in our community because money talks. You know, the NFL is paying attention to things now because of, you know, the fact that they think it may hit their bottom line. What some of these players are talking about, what some of these NBA players are talking about. I just think it's really, really important that we build businesses in our communities for ourselves so we have the opportunity to hire other people and give them the opportunity. That's one of the things, again, that I'm really, really proud of, is the fact that, you know, not just talking to people about what they can do, but doing it yourself. You know, people call me. I've had students that call because they've seen, you know, I mean, and this story really actually touched me, but I remember when I first started running my TV commercials way back when, maybe like 10 years ago, not too long after I first came down to Florida. And I had an older Black gentleman that called me and, you know, I was thinking, okay, what kind of issue do you have? I mean, was this a discrimination issue? Is this, you know, a personal injury issue, or whatever the situation is? He said, no, I just wanted to talk to you because I haven't seen a whole lot of Black attorneys on TV. You know, and this man was actually emotional on the phone. He's an older gentleman. So I don't know, he was older than I am. I don't know what kind of experiences that he's had personally, but I just think it's good to be able to show people what they can do and encourage them to build that wealth in their community, because ultimately that's a big part of what's going to make a difference for us. Yeah. You know, I think marching and doing all those things are great and they have their place, but people really look at economics, you know? And when you think about the buying power of the Black community here in the US, you know, I've seen different statistics, but I mean, if we are truly the 17th wealthiest country in the world, we should be able to do something with that clout. We should be able to do something with that buying power that's going to make a difference for our community, you know? And I just think what I'm hoping happens, and I've seen little things here and there, people talking about different things, but I do hope that Black people can come together as a unit and do more to try to build up each other, not just emotionally, spiritually, whatever, but economically as well, because to me, that's going to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Thank you. Lisa, any parting words?
I have the sun coming into my face. So I'm going to part words by doing a few flash bullets. First, to anybody who may be white and listening today, or somebody who's non-Black but non-white, really please start having these conversations with your kids, because the anti-Black racism that we're seeing isn't coming out of my house. It's coming out of your house. My kid is not going to his friends and asking, you know, for the end pass or to come touch up my hair. That's your kids who are putting their hands in my kid's hair. You have got to start having these conversations. We all come from different nationalities, but white people, you have a race as well. And it's really important that that happens. You are either going to be part of the solution, which is part of dismantling this racism that's happening, or you are perpetuating it. And your silence is perpetuation. Nobody gets to be Switzerland here. Hell, even Switzerland isn't Switzerland anymore. They picked a side. So you really have to make a choice. You are either going to actively figure out how to help or you're not. But please, please, please have the conversation. Second, I just want to echo, please definitely support your Black businesses. It's so important, your Black shows. It's just so critically important to do that. But also think about getting politically active. And what I mean by that is our youth are leading this. I had the pleasure of speaking at a Black Lives Matter rally, and it was totally brought together by the youth. And we had some 9,000 people there. That's a COVID issue, wore masks, tried to space. But the point is that they got active. You all can get active too. And you can do so by doing something as simple as joining your PTA at your local school, going to volunteer at a person in a party that you are part of, representing them. You know, there's so many ways that you can get involved that don't require a big stage, but we have got to get involved. Our voices have to be heard if we don't want to have people speaking for us. And nobody should be speaking for us. We can speak for ourselves, but we need to get out there, because when you don't have money, power is incredibly helpful as well. So I just want to encourage people to really think about how you can get involved. You can sit at home now. There's a lot of events happening via Zoom. You don't have to physically go someplace necessarily. So I really want to encourage that from people as well. And I also want to just give a shout out to you, my cousin. I know you have been doing this for a couple years, and it's just so important because our voices aren't being heard. And you're also contributing to you're switching another narrative that all Black people are the same. We're not the Black community, we're Black communities. And you're giving a voice to a very important part of our community, the Caribbean Edge, right? So I just want to thank you for that. And say, if anybody has any questions, they can email me directly, and I'd be happy to respond to that. And I'm so sorry I'm going to have to go.
No problem. I know you do.
Follow my own advice and get involved.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure having you join us, and we'll wrap up. Thank you for the time. Love you. Take care.
It was nice to meet you as well. Thank you for being the attorney. And my sister was one of 13 law students at Berkeley. So we need you all well badly to do this stuff. Get out there. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Right. Bye. And I don't want you to go as yet, Attorney Yeboah. What are your parting words? I know we before we do that, we had a lot of people tuning in, just saying hello and agreeing with a lot that was said. So definitely thank the viewers for tuning in and for sharing this episode as well. They love you and Lisa as well. So tell us, what parting words do you have? Any change you want to make? Any advice? One of the things as we're talking that stood out to me was, how did you become successful? Because I think you can, even though you say you're not there yet, what advice do you give young men, young women to say, you got through it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think success is a journey. It's not a destination. You know, no matter where you get to, you can always try to get, and there's different definitions of success, but what the advice I would give is, follow your passion. Whatever it is that you believe in, do it. Don't let other people tell you how your life should go or what profession, and I know parents have a tendency to do that. People that care about you and is coming from a good place. But if you do what you really, really enjoy doing, you're going to be good at it, because you're going to spend a lot of time, you're going to dedicate it to doing whatever that craft is, it's not going to seem like work, you know? So that's one of the things that I would advise people to do. Just find out what you love and what you're passionate about and go out and do it, you know? Because again, success has many definitions. Now, when it comes to business, one of the things that I think is important, believe it or not, I've met a lot of lawyers that have not done very well financially. A lot of people think because you've gotten to a certain place and you have a certain degree, that just means that, you know, you must be doing well. One of the things that I always try to advise people to do is, especially if you're thinking about running your own business, is I don't care if you're a lawyer, doctor, or whatever field that you go in, learn as much as you can about just basic business principles. You know, how to run a business, you know, how to put together a business plan. Those things that may not seem like they're important are going to be the roadmap to your success down the road, you know? Just think about going somewhere. Let's say you take a boat out into the ocean and you just go. You don't plan anything. You don't decide what your destination is. You don't lay the necessary foundation to get where you're going. You're just going to be a rudderless ship. So to a certain extent, focus on the business stuff. Try to get some education, especially if you're going to start your own thing, about, you know, the finances piece of it, the planning piece, the marketing, you know, all those things give you a much better chance at success, you know? And again, I'm a true believer in an economic engine, you know, because I think the more Black businesses we have, the more Black employers we have. You know, and the more Black employers you have, the more opportunities there are for young kids that are coming up, you know. I've had folks call me that want to come by the office and walk around and kind of see what it's like. What does a law office look like? You know, can I go to court with you? And oftentimes we open our doors for that because I want to ignite that spark in that person who may be the next person that, you know, gives jobs to 10 other people that otherwise wouldn't have those opportunities. So, yeah, but again, I mean, I'm very easy to find in my website, you know, 1-800-TELL-SAM. You know, if you ever decide you want to call me, whether it be business or personal, want to discuss certain things. We do a lot of things in the community. We have a scholarship we give annually. We do different types of food drives and other community events. So if you want to participate in some of those things too, or contribute and try to help out with some of those things, we'll be more than happy to hear from you.
Oh yeah, and I'll certainly share it. I think it's so important that our kids become successful and that they're seen successful, well-educated, well-spoken people in positions. It's so important because that's how we're going to get through this beyond the protesting, right? Is educating ourselves and being financially stable. And everything we said tonight, communicating with our children, being mentors, and using the platforms that we have as well. So I can't thank you enough. And Dr. Gunderson.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. I wanted to echo what your cousin said as well. What you do is very, very important. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter what people are out there doing if people don't know about it, you know, so people like you that bring that, you know, make people aware of what's going on in the community, I think is really, really important. So thank you.
And I thank Commissioner Grant once again for introducing us. And maybe we'll have opportunities for me to do some stuff with you in the community as well. So thank you. And to our viewers, thanks for tuning in. We'll go in and respond to any comments. I didn't see any as I was browsing through, but if you know me well enough, you know I'll respond all hours of the night. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Caribbean Edge. And I have a beautiful, amazing guest for next week. And we're going to have some laugh and carry on next week. So have a great night. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.